back, Epic families. I hope that last week you had some great conversations about the last chapter of Habakkuk. And this week we're going to do something a little bit differently. But first, I have a few announcements that you need to know for things that are coming up pertaining to Epic. So first is November 22nd. November 22nd, this is Saturday. There will be a middle school and a high school bonfire. So the middle school bonfire will be from 7 to 8:30 at the Hub, and I'll be hosting that. And then the high school bonfire will be at the Avies house from 7 to 8:30, and Nick will be there. So put that on your calendars. Your leaders will continue to remind you, but just letting you guys know ahead of time that that is coming up. Second is November 25th is the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. So there's no Epic family on November 25th. And then finally, December 2nd, I know it's still a little bit away, but December 22nd, there's going to be something called Momentum on the Road, and that's going to happen at Grace Church in Goshen. And so there will be more details coming out about that and how the traveling will happen, because we're going to have to drive up there for that Wednesday night. There's tickets that have to be purchased for it. So there'll be more info coming out about that. But just know that December 2nd, there's going to be something awesome going on, and we want to be a part of it. But now, let's get into this week's teaching. So you may have heard of this story before. It comes from the Gospels, and so it's about the rich young ruler. And you may have heard different people teach about this. You may have read this before. It has a lot of great application, and I hope that we can pull some really applicable things from it for actually what we're going through today. But first, before we do that, I want you and your Epic family to go ahead and read the passage that we're going to be covering. So it's Luke chapter 18, verses 18 through 23. So go ahead and read that together. So after you've read that, let's talk about a little bit of the context. So Luke, he places this event in the midst of a series of parables designed to indicate the character of discipleship. So all of the gospel writers place this story, this parable, towards the end of Jesus' worldly ministry. And as Mark stated, this story, Jesus is about to leave the town which he's teaching in, and he's on his way out when this young man runs up to him and says that he has to ask him a question. He falls on his knees, and think about this. So this young ruler couldn't have looked Jesus up on his Instagram or YouTube. This was literally going to be one of the last possible times that he could have ever seen him, Jesus, face to face and actually talk to him. So let's pick up the story in Luke 18, chapter 18. It says, "And a certain ruler asked him, 'Good teacher, what must I do to attain eternal life?'" And so think about it. We have this young, really excited, this earnest, wealthy young man. And if we think about it during the context of that time, he's young and he's wealthy. He probably, he's ambitious. He wants to know about spiritual things. So he probably had at least some sort of leadership role, maybe at the synagogue. And he was a well-respected person in that community. And it says that he fell on his knees. And so think about it. He's a wealthy young man, and so he probably has really nice clothes. He's probably really clean. And he's kneeling in the dirt at the roadside of this town with a burning question that he wants to ask Jesus. And he said, "Good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" And let's remember, when Jesus is teaching in towns, typically the majority of the wealthy people that he comes in contact with are religious teachers. And so typically the religious teachers wouldn't ask him an honest question. They typically would ask him questions trying to trip him up or get him to say something that doesn't quite seem in line with the law, or questions such as, should we pay taxes to Caesar, or why do your disciples pluck grain on the Sabbath? Just honestly questions that will get him to say something wrong. And it's a sincere question that this young ruler asked Jesus that he really wanted to know the answer to. He says, "How do I inherit eternal life?" And the word in Greek translated to inherit actually means to obtain or to come in possession of. And I think that's important because as we continue down this story, we see that this young man struggles with understanding the way that Jesus talks about eternal life. He's thinking about it in a way that he can actually obtain it, that like he can somehow purchase it among himself. And this question that he asks tells us two things. First, it tells us that he must be feeling inadequate, or he doesn't understand something fully, or he wouldn't have even came and asked Jesus. He actually wanted to know. And second, it's that he believes that eternal life is real, but maybe more importantly, he believes that eternal life is actually something that he can obtain by what he does, that he can actually do something to earn it. And I bet if we went around and asked a lot of people that say they're Christians or that are just in our community, I bet that they would believe something kind of similar to that. That they kind of believe, right, if you're a good person, that you can go to heaven, right? If you're a bad person, you're going to go to hell. Well, only really bad people, right? I mean, like breaking the law by like speeding and stuff like that isn't really that bad. But just like this straightforward black and white type of right and wrong, good and bad type of deal. And that's what you'll hear a lot in our worldly culture, is that good people, good things happen to good people and good people go to heaven, right? It's kind of that easy. But the young man is posing this question in a way that he actually wants to learn. And so he addresses Jesus and his question as good teacher, which is honestly kind of somewhat of a improper way to address Jesus. Typically you would address him as like rabbi, but that doesn't really matter. And so Jesus kind of rebukes him and says to the young man concerning his address of him, he says, "Why do you call me good?" He says, "Why do you call me good? No one is good except God above." And let's pause for a second and think about how Jesus responded to him. He says, "No one is good except God." And it's important that he says that because this young man's idea of goodness is obviously a bit skewed to the actual truth of the goodness of God. And unless he grasps the standards of goodness, that God's standards are so much different than his and ours, then everything else that Jesus is going to follow this with is going to be kind of confusing to him. So go ahead with your group real quick and talk about what goodness actually is. What are some characteristics of good people? What, when you think of a good person, is something that you may think about. So go ahead and talk about that with your group, and then go ahead and start the video again. So that conversation I want to come back to actually a little bit at the end of this passage. So after pointing out the young man's struggle to grasp goodness compared to God's goodness, Jesus goes on to learn and inquire more about this young man's culture. He wants to know more about him, and he says, you know the commandments: don't commit adultery, do not murder, do not steal, do not give false testimony, honor your father and mother. And the young man responds, "I have kept all these things since I was a boy." And let's look at the context of these commandments. So all of the things that were listed in chapter 18, verses 20 through 21, he says, all of these things that were listed, they talk about this young man's relationship to other people. It doesn't go upward at all, it's only outward. And that's important because we see that the young man had kept all the commandments, right? Under Jewish law, he did his best to complete and to keep all the commandments, but he still lacks something. And Jesus senses that he still lacks this. He lacks this completeness, right? Or else he wouldn't have came to Jesus in the first place, because he wants to know something that he's missing. And when he heard this, the young man heard this, and Jesus said to him, "You still lack one thing." In chapter 18, verse 22, he says, "You still lack one thing. Sell everything you have and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come follow me." So Jesus' solution to this young man is to sell everything and give the proceeds to the poor. He says, if this man does this, if this man does these things, then Jesus assures him that he will have treasure in heaven. that he will have a reward waiting for him. And it's kind of ironic that Jesus says, sell all your stuff on earth, and then you'll be rich in heaven. Because we've seen throughout history that people try to do almost the opposite, right? That they try to do things to buy their way into heaven. Just look across Europe and look at these huge cathedrals with people's names written in the walls of these huge amounts of money that they've given. And we see it all over the world. It's so common that people often try to do things or give money to try to get their way in better graces of God so they can go to heaven. But Jesus wasn't proposing to this young man to buy anything. He wasn't saying buying or giving. He didn't say, hey, could you give to the Jesus Christ Gospel Fund? No, he doesn't. He proposes that this young man sells all his property and give the proceeds to those that couldn't return the favor. And the truth that Jesus is trying to portray here is that money itself has a way of polluting us, and he's trying to get the young man to understand this. It's tempting us, and it compromises our values. And in 1 Timothy 6:10 it says, for the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Some people, eager for money, have wandered from faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. And so, one last time, I want you to pause and talk about why is money called the root of all evil? Why do you think it is? And then after that, read Luke chapter 16, verse 13. And then start the video again. So recently Jesus had said to his disciples, he was talking to them about the importance of faithfulness when it regards money. So he says, no servant can serve two masters. Either he will hate one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. And so his disciples are seeing this young man kneeling before him, and Jesus says, sell all your things and then come follow me. And so the disciples are actually watching this young man who has a lot of money have an opportunity to become a disciple. And money isn't the only thing that Jesus asked this young man to give up. Think about the context. He asked him to give up his possessions, right? His status, everything that his money brings. I'm sure his family was wealthy. Think about if he gives all his money away, he probably will be disowned by his family. But how often have we been tempted to do things that were self-serving or unethical because of the lure of, in this case, money, or you could say because of the lure of status or social media followers, right? Or just look cool in front of your friends. How often have we been tempted to do those things? But Jesus' words don't just upset the young rich ruler. They also kind of feel like they can upset us. I've heard so many times in response to this passage people saying, well, he's not really talking about us, right? He's not like saying that we should sell all our stuff because then the world wouldn't really work the right way. I mean, obviously, but do we fear that that Jesus may require us to do something that would cost us too much? What are we afraid of? Do we fear because we sense that we may not be fully surrendered to God and that there might be something holding us back the same way it was holding the young rich ruler back? So at the end of verse 22, Jesus says, then come and follow me. And this story can almost cause a reaction in us because it's not just the disposing of wealth that Jesus asked this man to do. At the end of 22, it says, you still lack one thing, sell everything you have and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven, then come and follow me. And he concludes that verse with two commands. He says, then come and follow. But I don't think that he's just inviting him to be figuratively. I think this is actual real invitation. But this invitation just doesn't extend to the young rich ruler in that context. It's actually an invitation to us. It's an invitation to us that we too are invited to come and follow and obey and join that extended family of Christ. But I think it's important to see the reaction of the young rich ruler when Jesus offers him this. It says in 18:23, it says, but this radical call to discipleship is too much for the young rich ruler. It says, when he heard this, he became very sad because he was a man of great wealth. And the word sad, translated from the Greek, actually means like deeply grieved. Like this young man was grieving over this decision. And we see in Matthew and Mark that they wrote that this young man went away sorrowful. And Jesus remained standing there. And this young rich ruler, his face stricken with grief, he rises up from his knees and he averts his eyes from Jesus and he leaves from the group. And he can't go with them. He cannot go with Jesus as much as he would love to go. But there's one more thing that because he can't leave this behind. And in a very real sense, he had broken the first commandment, which says, do not have any other gods before me, because his God was not Jesus. His God was his money and his status. And so Jesus continues, and we see that the challenge for the disciples remains. But is there anything that we are unwilling to give up to follow Jesus? It may not be money. It may be, like I said before, like our Instagram or watching YouTube, or it could be porn, or it could be your anger or anxiety. Are there things that we aren't willing to lay down to fully commit to following Jesus, just like this young rich ruler couldn't do? But it's important that Jesus doesn't say to him, you have to follow me. He doesn't say that. He calls gently to him and says, if you come, lay down your things, sell them, give it to the poor, and then come and follow me. He's asking him. He's not demanding of it. He's not demanding it of him. He's not forcing him to do anything, because it actually is a choice. But like your first conversation time, the Bible tells us very clearly that anyone who tries to save themselves is in fact cursed. It says it in Galatians 3:13, and it says, because sin corrupts every thought, word, and action, it makes it impossible for us to do good works, or ever to be pure and holy on our own. And so this young man couldn't understand the goodness of God. And we can't understand it either unless we read Mark chapter 10, verse 26. It says, but with man it is impossible, but not with God, for all things are possible with God. And the context of that verse is so important, because it's saying that us on our own, we can't be good people. At the end, when we're on our deathbed, there's going to be good people that go to hell, and there's going to be seemingly bad people that go to heaven. But we need to remember that good people don't go to heaven, forgiven people go to heaven. And it's important for us to realize that goodness can never be achieved on our own. We have to have it by the strength of God, and that is your encouragement, that you know where the source of goodness comes from. And so when you're out and you're talking with your friends and your family, and you're around people that are just hurting and cannot give up that one thing, remember that on your own you couldn't have given it up either. But it's because of your choice to follow God. And if you haven't made that choice, I encourage you to seek out where real goodness comes from, and where that fulfilling, never thirsting again can come from. And if that is you, I'd love to have the conversation, or for you to talk with your leader about it. But that's it for this week. Guys, I'm so excited that, again, I got to teach in front of you. I hope that you can take something away. Leaders, you have your questions. Guys, have a great rest of your epic family and a great rest of your week.